Introduction to Beauty and her family. In a small, peaceful village nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, there lived a merchant and his three daughters. The family's home was modest, an old stone cottage with a thatched roof, tucked away at the edge of the village, surrounded by a garden of wildflowers. The father, a kind-hearted and hard-working man, was once a prosperous merchant who traveled far and wide to trade goods. However, after a series of unfortunate events, including a failed business venture and a loss of wealth, the family's life had changed drastically. No longer wealthy, they had to make do with simpler means, but their hearts were filled with gratitude for the little they had. The father's two older daughters were named Caroline and Lucinda. Both were beautiful, but their beauty was matched only by their vanity and desire for luxury. They spent their days admiring themselves in mirrors, longing for the latest fashions, and constantly complaining about their reduced circumstances. They were more concerned with outward appearances than with the quality of their character or the happiness of their family. Despite their father's best efforts to make them understand the value of humility, they seemed to care only about material wealth. In contrast, the youngest daughter, Beauty, known as Belle in the village, was a stark contrast to her sisters. She was a young woman of remarkable beauty, with golden hair that cascaded like a waterfall and eyes as bright and clear as the sky on a summer's day. But what made her truly special was not just her outward beauty, but the kindness, humility, and intelligence that shone through her every action. She had a love for reading and spent much of her time in the quiet corners of the cottage, immersed in books about far-off lands, great adventures, and the lessons of life. Her love for learning was matched only by her selflessness. Beauty's heart was pure, and she cared deeply for others. She often helped her father with his work, tending to the garden or assisting him with the bookkeeping of his remaining business dealings. She never complained about their reduced circumstances, nor did she express any longing for riches. Unlike her sisters, Beauty found joy in the simple things, the warm glow of a fire on a cold evening, the scent of fresh bread baking in the oven, the laughter of her family gathered together. Her sisters, though they loved her in their own way, often ridiculed Beauty for her modesty and unpretentious nature. They would mock her for choosing a book over a new dress, or for helping their father with his work instead of lounging in front of a mirror. "Why do you waste your time with all those books?" Caroline would sneer. "Who will marry you if you don't make yourself more attractive?" Lucinda would add, "You're pretty enough, but you must make sure everyone knows it." But Beauty paid them no mind. She knew that true beauty came from within, and she was content to live a life of simplicity and goodness. Unlike her sisters who measured their worth by the things they owned, the family's former wealth had once afforded them the luxury of a comfortable life, and they had enjoyed the respect and admiration of the townspeople. But now, they lived humbly, relying on what little they had and making do with what they could. The father often reflected on how the life they had once known had been taken from them, but he never allowed himself to dwell on bitterness. He remained grateful for his family's health and for the love they shared. Beauty, ever wise beyond her years, often comforted him when he was troubled, reminding him that happiness could not be found in material wealth alone. Despite their modest lifestyle, Beauty and her father shared a strong bond of love and respect. They both cherished the quiet moments they spent together, whether it was working side by side in the garden or simply enjoying a peaceful evening by the fire. Beauty's calm presence had become the heart of the family, providing solace to her father and even softening the hard edges of her sisters' personalities. Though they rarely admitted it, little did they know, their lives were about to change in ways they could not imagine. The father's journey and the curse. The morning sun had barely risen over the small village when the father, a once prosperous merchant, received news that would change the course of his life. One of his long-forgotten ships, stranded for years due to a failed business venture, had finally returned to port. On board was a cargo that could restore the family's fortune, precious goods from far-off lands, worth far more than they had hoped. The father was overcome with excitement and anticipation, for this could mean the return of the comfort and respect the family had once known. It was an opportunity to rebuild everything that had been lost. Without wasting any time, the father made preparations for a journey to the port. He had to reclaim the goods, oversee the transaction, and ensure that everything was in order. It had been many years since he had embarked on a long journey like this. But he knew that this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to change their fate, with the promise of a brighter future ahead. He kissed his daughters goodbye and set off, feeling a sense of hope he had not felt in years. However, the journey did not unfold as he had imagined. As the day wore on, the weather began to shift. Dark clouds gathered overhead, and a sudden storm swept in from the sea. The wind howled fiercely, and the rain came down in torrents. The father, accustomed to the occasional tempest, tried to push forward, but the storm grew stronger by the hour. His path became unclear, the road obscured by the sheets of rain. Soon, he lost his bearings completely. The road vanished under a blanket of thick mist, and the trees around him began to blur into dark shadows. He had been traveling for hours, but there was no sign of the port or any familiar landmarks. Desperation crept into his heart. His ship, his cargo, his hopes. Everything was slipping through his fingers as the storm raged on. As the night began to fall and his strength waned, the father pressed on, moving through the relentless storm as best he could. It was then, through the haze of the storm and the swirling wind, that he saw a flicker of light in the distance. With a surge of hope, he made his way toward it, his heart racing. The light led him through the trees, and soon he found himself standing at the gates of a vast and imposing castle. Its towering spires pierced the night sky, and the stone walls seemed to glow faintly in the storm's light. It was unlike any place he had ever seen, a place of both grandeur and mystery. Exhausted and desperate for shelter, the father approached the castle. The gates creaked open as if guided by some unseen hand, and he stepped inside. seeking refuge from the storm. The castle's interior was vast and dark, but there was an unmistakable warmth to it, as though the building itself had been waiting for him. Strange sounds echoed from the distant halls, but there was no sign of any inhabitants. He was about to call out when a group of servants, strange, ethereal figures, appeared before him. Their forms were blurry, as if they were not entirely of this world, but they moved with purpose, leading him to a grand dining hall. There, he was seated at a table laden with food and drink, enough to satisfy the deepest hunger. The father ate gratefully, feeling the exhaustion and cold of the storm leave him with each bite. He was given a comfortable bed in one of the castle's many rooms, and as he prepared to sleep, he marveled at the strange, almost magical quality of the place. But there was something unsettling about it too, something mysterious and unspoken. The next morning, as the father prepared to leave, he encountered the owner of the castle, the beast. He was a towering figure, with broad shoulders, sharp, piercing eyes, and a face that was a grotesque mixture of animal and man. His appearance was terrifying, his features twisted into something monstrous. The father, though startled, bowed respectfully. "Who are you? And why have you come?" The beast's voice was deep and foreboding. The father, still shaken by the beast's imposing presence, explained his situation, his journey to reclaim his lost goods, his shelter from the storm, and his gratitude for the hospitality he had received. The beast, though not warm, nodded solemnly. "You are welcome to stay as long as you need," the beast said gruffly, "but leave by sundown. Do not overstay your welcome." With that, the beast turned and vanished into the shadows of the castle, leaving the father alone to gather his things. The father, feeling a sense of unease but grateful for the hospitality, made his way out into the garden, eager to depart. Before leaving the castle grounds, the father was drawn to a beautiful rose bush that flourished in the garden. It was a rare sight in the cold, dark castle, with vibrant blooms that glistened with dew. As he reached out to admire the flowers, he thought of Beauty, his youngest daughter, who loved roses more than anything. In a moment of thoughtless impulse, he plucked one of the roses and tucked it carefully into his coat. It was a simple gesture, but one filled with love, and he hoped it would bring a smile to Beauty's face when he returned home. As he turned to leave, the beast suddenly appeared in the garden, his eyes burning with fury. "You dare steal my rose," the beast roared, his voice booming with rage. The father froze, the rose still clutched in his hand. I meant no harm," the father stammered, his heart racing. "It was only for my daughter. She loves roses more than anything. Please, forgive me." The beast's eyes glowed with an anger that seemed to fill the air itself. "You took what does not belong to you. For your greed, you will pay the price," he snarled. In a fit of fury, the beast's large claws curled into a fist, and the ground beneath the father's feet seemed to tremble. The father, still trembling from fear, fell to his knees, pleading for mercy. The beast's voice grew colder, more foreboding. You have broken my trust, and you will suffer the consequences. But I will give you one chance. Return to this castle, or send one of your daughters in your place. If not, you will face a curse from which there is no escape. The father, pale and shaking, nodded desperately. I will return. I swear it, he promised, though he did not understand the full gravity of the beast's curse. But as he turned to leave, he could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far darker than he could ever imagine. The beast's final words echoed in the father's ears as he fled the castle. Remember, the price of a single rose is far higher than you think. The father made his way back home, unsure of the consequences that awaited him and his family. Beauty's sacrifice. The father returned home late in the evening, drenched from the storm and heavy with the weight of his journey. He had walked for miles in the forest, his heart sinking further with each passing hour as the curse from the beast began to consume him with dread. When he arrived at the cottage, his daughters rushed to greet him, their faces filled with both concern and excitement. They had hoped for good news, the possibility of their family's fortune being restored, but the father's countenance was heavy with sorrow. Sitting down by the hearth, the father explained the tragic turn of events. He spoke of the castle, the terrifying beast, and how he had been forced to take a rose from the garden as a token for beauty. When he had been confronted by the beast, his heart had sunk with terror. But it was not the anger of the beast that haunted him. It was the terrible curse he had left behind, one that demanded a price. The beast, he is not just a man, the father said, his voice quivering. He is something else, something much darker. He offered me food, shelter, and warmth. But when I took a rose from his garden as a gift for you, he became furious. He told me that I had stolen from him, and in his anger, he cursed me. He told me that I must return or send one of you to take my place. The father's voice faltered as he explained the beast's demand. He had been given an ultimatum: return to the castle, or send one of his daughters in his stead. The father's heart had shattered at the thought of one of his beloved daughters being forced into such a cruel fate. Tears filled his eyes as he looked at his three daughters, Caroline and Lucinda, with their shallow hearts, had stared at him in confusion, their faces creased with disdain and self-interest. Neither of them could comprehend the sacrifice that would need to be made, nor would they ever consider volunteering to take their father's place. Beauty, on the other hand, sat in silence, her mind working through the horrible reality of what her father was saying. She had listened carefully, her gentle heart filled with sympathy for the man who had once been so kind to her family. The beast, though frightening, had shown her father kindness and shelter during his desperate time of need. And yet, the price of that hospitality was too high. Father, Beauty said softly, breaking the painful silence, I will go in your place. The words hit the family like a cold wind, and the room fell deathly quiet. The father looked at his youngest daughter in shock, his face contorted with disbelief. He could not understand how she could offer herself up in such a way. His mind screamed to stop her, to tell her that there must be another way, that she was too young, too kind to suffer such a fate. But Beauty, with her calm, wise demeanor, looked at him with clear, compassionate eyes. "You cannot go," he protested weakly, his voice breaking. "You are too precious to me. I cannot bear to lose you. My sweet daughter, I will face the beast myself, if it means keeping you safe." But Beauty shook her head, her face filled with determination.
"No, Father.
You gave me life, and you raised me with love and kindness. Now it is my turn to repay that love. I would rather go in your place than see you suffer the beast's wrath."
Her voice was calm,
yet there was a quiet strength behind her words. Beauty had always been a selfless soul, never one to seek the spotlight, and always willing to put others before herself. Her sense of responsibility to her family was unwavering, and though the thought of facing the beast terrified her, she believed that this was the only way to save her father from the terrible curse that had been placed upon him. Tears welled in the father's eyes as he realized the depth of his daughter's love and sacrifice. He tried to protest again, but there was no stopping Beauty. She had made her decision, and nothing could dissuade her. In that moment, he knew that his daughter was the embodiment of the values he had always tried to teach: selflessness, courage, and unwavering love. Her older sisters, who had been listening silently, were less moved by Beauty's words. Caroline and Lucinda exchanged a glance, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. They could not understand why Beauty would choose such a path.
For them,
the idea of sacrificing oneself for another was a foreign concept, one that they had never embraced. They were more concerned with their own comfort and appearances, and the thought of Beauty taking their father's place seemed both unnecessary and foolish. "Why would you do this, Beauty?" Caroline scoffed. "You're giving up everything for someone who doesn't even deserve it. He's a beast, a monster. You could be safe here, with us, and yet you choose to go to him? It's absurd." Lucinda, who shared her sister's opinions, added, "You're too naive. The beast could be dangerous. You could be throwing your life away for nothing." But Beauty ignored their harsh words. She knew that neither of her sisters could understand the depth of her sacrifice. They were driven by selfish desires, always seeking to gain from others.
Beauty,
on the other hand, was driven by a deep sense of duty to her family and a belief that love and compassion were worth more than anything else in the world. That evening, after many tearful goodbyes, Beauty set out on her journey. Her father, though devastated, knew there was no turning back. As he watched her disappear down the path, he felt a great weight in his chest. He would never forget the look of bravery and love that shone in his daughter's eyes. He knew that the world was losing a beautiful soul, but he also knew that Beauty had made her choice. The road to the beast's castle was long and winding, and Beauty's heart was heavy with both fear and curiosity. As she walked, she thought about the beast and what kind of creature he might be. She imagined a hideous monster with fangs and claws, but she also wondered if there was more to him than met the eye.
Could he, too,
Be a victim of some curse? Could his monstrous form hide a gentler soul beneath? With each step, her thoughts grew darker, but her resolve remained steady. Beauty knew that she was doing the right thing. If her father's life was to be saved, then she had to face whatever awaited her at the castle. She walked through the thick forest, the shadows of the trees stretching long into the night, and with every step, she felt both the weight of her sacrifice and the hope that her love for her family would be enough to overcome the beast's curse. As Beauty neared the castle, she could see its towering spires rising against the darkened sky. The castle loomed before her, cold and foreboding, but Beauty, though afraid, kept her head high. She had made her choice.
now?
She would face whatever awaited her within the walls of the beast's lair. Life at the beast's castle. When Beauty arrived at the beast's castle, she was taken aback by the grandiosity and eerie silence that surrounded her. The castle, towering and imposing, was much larger than anything she had ever seen before. Its stone walls were dark and cold, the vast corridors stretching endlessly in every direction. The air felt heavy with secrets, and the silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the sound of her own footsteps echoing as she walked through the grand halls. It was a place of solitude, where the quiet seemed to drown out even the sounds of nature itself. Yet despite its daunting appearance, the castle was not without its strange charm. The enormous windows allowed slivers of sunlight to filter through, casting long shadows across the opulent furniture and priceless tapestries that lined the walls. Beauty was led to a magnificent room, far more lavish than she had ever imagined. The bed was draped in rich, velvety fabrics, the floor covered in plush carpets that seemed to swallow her feet as she walked. The furniture was intricately carved, made of the finest wood and adorned with gold trim. Her room was a sanctuary, yet it felt like a gilded cage. Despite the luxury around her, Beauty could not shake the overwhelming sense of loneliness that settled in her heart. The castle, though stunning, was an unsettling place. It was as though it were too vast, too empty, its grandeur only emphasizing her isolation. The enchanted servants, invisible to her at first, began to appear, moving silently through the halls. They were kind, offering her food, setting the table, and attending to her needs with an unspoken grace. Their presence was both comforting and mysterious. They did not speak much, but they treated her with a gentleness that made her feel cared for, though she could not help but wonder who or what they truly were. She had heard whispers of magic and enchantments in the village, but it was impossible to comprehend the truth of the castle's inhabitants until she experienced it firsthand. Despite the kindness of the servants and the comfort of her room, Beauty felt a deep sense of unease. The castle was too quiet, too grand for one person to inhabit alone. She felt like an outsider in this strange place, wondering how long she would have to stay in the beast's home, and whether she would ever see her family again. Each day she explored the castle, hoping to uncover its secrets. But all she found were empty rooms and darkened hallways. The walls seemed to whisper, as if the castle itself were alive, watching her every move. As night fell, Beauty would sit alone in her room, staring out at the moonlit landscape from the balcony. The wind howled outside, sending a chill through the air. But within the walls of the castle, it was always eerily still.
She often thought of her family,
wondering how they were faring without her. She missed her father's comforting presence and her sister's petty squabbles, though she had never truly understood their need for wealth and vanity. She longed to return home, but she knew that the curse was real. Her father's life hung in the balance, and she could not abandon him, not even for her own peace of mind. Each evening, the Beast would appear for dinner. He would arrive at the same time every night, his towering figure filling the doorway, his eyes dark and intense. He was an imposing presence, and each time he entered the room, Beauty could not help but feel a pang of fear. His fur, thick and wild, his sharp teeth, and his piercing eyes made him seem more animal than man.
and yet,
There was something about him that was strangely compelling. The Beast would sit at the opposite end of the grand table, his voice low and gruff. Though he often asked her the same question, "Will you marry me?" Beauty always replied with a firm but gentle no. It was the same response every night. And the Beast would nod, his expression clouded with disappointment but never anger. Beauty had no desire to marry the Beast, but she began to understand that his repeated requests were not born of cruelty or desire to control her.
the Beast,
For all his fearsome appearance, seemed to be a deeply lonely creature. It was clear to her that he was searching for something, perhaps redemption, or companionship, or simply an end to his isolation. His words, though blunt and unadorned, carried with them a sadness that resonated deeply within her. Despite his initial coldness, Beauty began to notice subtle changes in the Beast's behavior. He would sometimes sit quietly at the table, gazing out at the vast garden beyond the castle windows. On those evenings, his eyes seemed far away, as if he were lost in a memory or a regret. He no longer demanded anything from her beyond her company, and while he asked her to marry him each night, it was clear that he respected her refusal. She began to feel a flicker of compassion for him, recognizing the sadness that lingered beneath his monstrous exterior. One evening, as she sat in the grand hall, contemplating the Beast's silent demeanor, she overheard a conversation between two of the castle's enchanted servants. They spoke of the curse that had befallen their master, a curse that could only be broken by someone who could see past his appearance and love him despite it. The Beast's cruel and bitter nature, the servants explained, had come about as a result of the curse. He had been a prince once, but his heart had been hardened by vanity and pride. The curse had transformed him into the beastly figure he was now, and only true love could lift the enchantment. Beauty's heart ached as she listened to the servant's words. The Beast had not always been a monster, and the cruelty she had first seen in him was a product of his despair. She had been judging him based on his appearance, just as others had likely done to him throughout his life. Perhaps, if she could offer him kindness and understanding, she could break the walls that had been built around his heart. One day, the beast gave Beauty a magical mirror, a gift that would change her perception of him and her situation. The mirror, he explained, would allow her to see anything she wished, and it would show her her family. She could use it to view their lives and learn how they were faring in her absence. At first, Beauty was reluctant, not wanting to see her family suffer while she was trapped in the beast's castle. But the beast urged her to look, assuring her that it was not out of malice. Beauty gazed into the mirror, her heart heavy with longing. She saw her father, weak and frail, sitting by the fire in the cottage. He was thin and exhausted, his face etched with worry and sorrow. Caroline and Lucinda, though they had made no effort to seek her out, were living comfortably, surrounded by luxuries they had gained in her absence. Beauty felt a pang of guilt in her chest as she saw her father's condition worsen with each passing day. He missed her, and though she had made the sacrifice to save him, she could see that the distance between them was taking its toll. Beauty's eyes filled with tears, but she wiped them away quickly. She knew she could not return yet. The beast's curse, though cruel, was not something that could be easily undone, and she had made a promise. Her heart was torn between her love for her father and the growing sense of empathy she felt for the beast. She began to understand that her time in the castle, though isolating and frightening, had taught her the power of compassion and the importance of looking beyond the surface to understand another soul. In the quiet of the castle, as she lay in her lavish room each night, Beauty found herself wrestling with her own feelings. She knew that, in time, she would have to decide whether she could look past the beast's monstrous exterior and offer him the love he so desperately needed. Beauty's desire to visit home. As the days passed in the beast's castle, Beauty began to grow weary of her solitude. While she had gradually adjusted to the eerie stillness of the grand hallways and the company of the enchanted servants, the loneliness that settled in her heart never fully abated.
The beast,
though kind in his own way, was still a creature of habit and mystery, his presence often shadowed by the deep melancholy that seemed to haunt him. Despite the warmth and care he showed during their nightly dinners, there were limits to their conversations. Beauty longed for her family, her father, her sisters, and the life she had left behind. One evening, after another quiet dinner with the beast, Beauty could no longer suppress the ache in her heart. She had been away from her family for so long, and the longing to see them was becoming unbearable. She had tried to focus on the beauty of the castle, the lush gardens, and the curious magical gifts the beast had given her. But none of it could fill the emptiness she felt. She longed for the simple comfort of her father's voice, the laughter of her sisters, even the familiar sights and sounds of her small cottage. "Beast," she said one night, as they finished their meal, "I've been here for so long now, and though I am grateful for your kindness, I miss my family terribly. May I visit them for a little while?"
just a short time.
"So I can see them once more?" The beast's face grew somber at her request. He had grown fond of Beauty in his own way, and the thought of losing her, even for a brief time, stirred a deep unease within him. For the first time, he hesitated. "I cannot allow you to stay away for too long," the beast said quietly. "You must return to the castle before long, for you are bound by the curse." But he trailed off, as if searching for the right words. "I will grant you this one visit, but remember what I have warned you. Do not forget your promise to return. If you stay away too long, something terrible will happen, something beyond your control." Beauty nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of his words. She had no intention of disobeying the beast, but her heart longed to see her family again. The beast, though reluctant, gave her a small, delicate ring. It was intricately designed, with a dark gemstone that seemed to shimmer with a light of its own. He explained that the ring was enchanted when she wore it and spoke her desire to return. It would transport her back to the castle immediately. "Take this," the beast said, his voice tinged with a sadness that he could not hide. "But remember, Beauty, stay true to your word. If you do not return soon, you will regret it." With the ring in her possession and a heart full of mixed emotions, Beauty made her preparations. She felt a pang of guilt as she thought of the beast, but she knew that seeing her family was something she could not ignore. The thought of her father's face, his kind eyes that had always watched over her, was enough to drive her forward. When the time came to leave, Beauty placed the ring on her finger and, with a soft whisper of her wish, found herself back at the doorstep of her father's cottage. The sight of her home brought an immediate sense of comfort and relief, and she hurried inside. Her father, who had been sitting by the fire, stood up in surprise, his eyes widening as he saw her. "Beauty," he cried, rushing to embrace her. "You've returned. I have missed you so much." "My dear girl." Beauty smiled through her tears, embracing her father tightly. "I've missed you too, Father. It's good to be home." Her sisters, Caroline and Lucinda, were quick to rush forward, their faces lighting up at the sight of Beauty. Their excitement was not purely out of affection, but also out of curiosity and the hope that Beauty might share some of the riches the beast had promised her in return for the sacrifice she had made.
"Oh, Beauty."
"How lovely to have you back," Caroline exclaimed, her voice sugary sweet. "We've been so lonely without you, and we've missed your company so much." Lucinda nodded, her eyes darting over Beauty's clothing, taking note of the fine fabrics and intricate designs. "You look so different," she added with a false smile. "So much more elegant. Have you been living in luxury at the beast's castle?" Beauty's heart sank at the realization that her sisters had not changed. They were still consumed by their vanity and materialism, more concerned with appearances than with the well-being of their family. Their superficial questions and veiled compliments were not the warm reunion she had hoped for. For the first few days, Beauty was glad to be home. Her father welcomed her with open arms, and the familiar routine of life at the cottage brought her comfort. However, As the days passed, the true nature of her sisters began to reveal itself. Caroline and Lucinda, who had always been preoccupied with wealth and status, began to subtly press Beauty to stay longer. They complimented her lavishly on her appearance, asking about the food and clothes she had seen in the castle, and inquiring about the riches she must have gained from the beast.
Slowly,
Their questions became more insistent, and they made it clear that they hoped Beauty would stay with them, perhaps indefinitely. They even hinted that the beast might be able to give them riches as well, if only Beauty could convince him to share his fortune.
Beauty,
Who had always been humble and kind, became disheartened by their greed. She had hoped that their time apart would have changed them, but it seemed that they were just as materialistic and shallow as ever. Their insatiable desire for luxury made her heart ache. They had forgotten the lessons of kindness, of love, and of sacrifice, the very things that had made her willing to leave them behind to save her father. Each day, Beauty felt more torn between her family and her duty to return to the beast. She missed her father dearly, but she also knew that her time at home was growing short. The warning the beast had given her echoed in her mind. If she stayed too long, something terrible would happen. She could not ignore it. Finally, after a few weeks, Beauty knew what she had to do. The guilt of staying too long weighed heavily on her conscience, and the sadness she felt at her sister's greed only made her more resolute. She loved her family, but her heart belonged to the beast. She knew that she could not abandon him, no matter the cost. With a heavy heart, Beauty took one last look at her father and sisters and made her way to the garden. She put on the magic ring and spoke the words that would take her back to the castle. She felt the familiar, warm pull of the magic, and in an instant, she was back within the castle walls. Though she was sad to leave, Beauty was certain that she had made the right choice. It was time to return to the beast, whose loneliness and kindness had captured her heart in ways she had never expected. The beast was not just a creature of curses and fear. He was a soul in need of love. And Beauty knew she was the only one who could offer him the redemption he sought. The final happily ever after. As Beauty knelt by the beast's side, her heart filled with despair. The weight of her guilt seemed unbearable. She had been given a second chance. But now she feared it was too late to save him. But as she whispered words of love, the air around them seemed to shift, the heavy silence lifting as a bright light enveloped the beast. Beauty gasped as she watched, her heart racing. Unable to look away, the light grew brighter, and in a sudden flash, the beast's form began to change. His fur receded, and his body began to shift and transform, losing its monstrous features. Beauty's breath caught in her throat as she watched the beast slowly turn back into a man, tall,
strong,
and handsome, with a regal bearing that matched the nobility in his eyes. His once fierce and sorrowful gaze now softened, filled with warmth and gratitude. The man who stood before her was not the creature she had feared when she first arrived, but a prince dignified, noble, and full of life. Beauty, the prince spoke softly, his voice now deep and tender. I am no longer the beast. The curse has been broken. You saved me, not just with your love, but with your kindness and your heart. I owe everything to you." Tears of joy filled Beauty's eyes as she looked at him, seeing not only the prince before her, but the man who had suffered, who had longed for love, and who had found it in her. She reached out to him, her hand trembling as he gently took it in his own. The prince smiled, and, in that moment, Beauty realized that he was not just a prince in name. He had transformed in a way deeper than any outward change. His heart had healed, his spirit restored, and the once cursed soul had found redemption through the very love he had once doubted he could find. "Tell me, Prince," Beauty asked, her voice full of compassion, "how did you come to be cursed?" The prince sighed, looking down as if the weight of his past still lingered within him. He began to recount the story of his transformation, a tale of arrogance and pride that had cost him everything. "I was once a proud and selfish prince," he began, his voice tinged with regret. "I had everything: wealth,
Power.
and beauty, but I took all these things for granted. I thought only of myself, and I treated others with cruelty, especially those who were less fortunate than I. One day, a mysterious enchantress came to my kingdom, seeking shelter. I turned her away, judging her by her appearance, not knowing who she truly was. In anger, she revealed herself to be a powerful enchantress, and as punishment for my arrogance, she cursed me. She said that only true love, pure and selfless, could break the curse, but that it would not happen unless I learned to love and to be loved in return. I had no hope of ever finding such love, not with my bitter heart and monstrous appearance." Beauty listened intently, her heart aching for the prince's past pain. She had never imagined that such cruelty had led him to the state in which she had found him. It was not just the beast who had suffered, but the prince beneath the curse, who had been lost and alone for so long. "And then you came," the prince continued, his gaze fixed on Beauty. "You showed me a kindness I had never known, and slowly, my heart began to change. I began to believe that love was possible again, even for someone like me. You broke through the walls I had built around myself,
And with that love,
the curse was lifted." Beauty smiled softly, her heart swelling with emotion. "I never knew how deep your pain ran, but I felt it from the first moment I saw you. I didn't love you because of your appearance. I loved you because of who you are inside. You taught me that love is not just about outward beauty, but about what lies within. You transformed not only into the man you were meant to be, but into the person who had learned to love." With the curse broken, Beauty and the prince's world changed in an instant. The once dark and lonely castle bloomed with life and warmth. The enchanted servants, who had been transformed into magical beings under the same curse, were restored to their human forms. They rejoiced in their newfound freedom, welcoming Beauty and the prince as their true rulers. The news of the prince's transformation spread throughout the kingdom, and soon preparations were underway for a grand celebration. The entire kingdom was invited to witness the wedding of the prince and Beauty, the woman who had saved him from the darkness of his own soul. The day of the wedding was a magnificent affair. The royal halls were adorned with flowers, and the air was filled with the sounds of music and laughter. Beauty wore a gown of shimmering gold and white, her beauty more radiant than ever. But it was not just her outer appearance that made her shine. It was the warmth of her heart, her kindness, and her inner beauty that captivated all who saw her. As she walked down the aisle, the prince stood at the altar, his eyes filled with love and admiration. Their eyes met, and, in that moment, they both knew that they had found something far more precious than wealth or power. They had found each other. Beauty's sisters, Caroline and Lucinda, were in attendance at the wedding. Though their jealousy and bitterness were apparent, they had hoped that Beauty's marriage would be to someone ordinary, someone beneath her.
But now,
seeing the love between Beauty and the prince, they could not help but feel the sting of their own vanity and selfishness. Despite their envy, Beauty remained humble and kind, even to her sisters, who had shown nothing but cruelty toward her during her time at home. The wedding ceremony was filled with joy, and as Beauty and the prince exchanged vows, the entire kingdom cheered. The prince kissed Beauty gently, sealing their commitment to each other. The two of them would rule the kingdom together, with wisdom, kindness, and love. In the years that followed, Beauty and the prince became beloved rulers. They were known for their compassion, fairness, and humility, always striving to ensure that their people lived happy and prosperous lives. They were a symbol of true love, a love that transcended appearances,
wealth,
and power, showing the world that the deepest beauty comes from within. And so, Beauty and the prince lived happily ever after, their love growing stronger with each passing day, a testament to the transformative power of love and the redemption that it brings.